Today on Fear and Greed, the local share market hits a new record high. The cost of generating electricity in Australia soars, and President Donald Trump orders the building of a detention camp at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba. Plus, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese classifies the discovery of a caravan full of explosives and the addresses of Jewish buildings as terrorism, and a passenger jet collides with a military helicopter in Washington, D.C. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Friday, the 31st of January, 2025. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, the main story this morning, the Australian share market hit a record high yesterday with investors buoyed by hopes of interest rate cuts next month. There's a bit of optimism out there, Sean.
Sure is. Around lunchtime yesterday, the S&P ASX 200 hit 8,515.1 points before closing up 0.5%, just under that 8,500 point mark. That surpassed the highs of December last year. Been a very strong start to the year for the ASX. Now, January's almost over. By the end of today, it will be over. The market's up more than 4% so far in 2025. If we did that every month, 4 times 12, 48% for the year, we'd be pretty happy with that.
That is an impressive start to the year. When you put it like that, Sean,
yeah,
we've had an impressive start to the year, right?
I reckon. Again, it's the banks leading the way. Man, you can't stop them. Commonwealth Bank and Westpac are both up nearly 5% this year. National Australia Bank and ANZ are up nearly 8%. Bit like last year, the gold companies have also done well. Northern Star, which is the biggest gold company in this country, it's up nearly 10%. This time around, though, we also have consumer discretionary companies. They're corporates that do well when the economic cycle improves. Well, they're shooting the lights out. Wesfarmers, Aristocrat Leisure, both up 8%. JB Hi-Fi up 9%. Harvey Norman up 12%. That's the sector which has done best of the 11 sub-indices of the ASX. They've had some friends. Fortescue Metals is up 5% as iron ore prices have risen. BHP and Rio are actually flat, so Fortescue has outperformed the other big miners. Goodman was having a great day a great year until the past few days when questions arose about the demand for data centres. It's up just 1% for 2025. Just a few of the other large caps, CSL and Tesla. Michael. That's the problem with Telstra nowadays, is that you always get Telstra and Tesla mixed up.
And the funny thing is we talk so much more now about Tesla than we do about Telstra. Like Telstra we might mention once every 2 weeks or something, and Tesla's
every second day.
Every second day. You were right.
Well, CSL and Telstra are lower this year, while Macquarie Bank is flat.
Sean, this rise, is it mostly being driven by the interest rate expectations, or is there, I'm kind of leading you somewhere here. Is there a host of things?
There could be a host of things. There are two main things, really. And the interest rate, the prospects of a rate cut in the middle of next month, that's certainly been driving it over the past 36 hours or so. Of course, we got those benign inflation figures on Wednesday. All four major banks, Westpac, National Australia Bank, ANZ and Commonwealth Bank, are now predicting a rate cut in about 3 weeks' time. There's also been a general boost from the election of Donald Trump. Everyone seems to be focusing on the good stuff like lower corporate tax rates, ignoring the tariff stuff. So that might come home to roost. It's not totally rational. So in a market where rates are expected to fall, banks theoretically aren't supposed to outperform, but they are. Now, consumer discretionary companies, like we talked about JB Hi-Fi, Harvey Norman, Wesfarmers, Aristocrat Leisure, they should do well, and they are. So that's sort of working. Consumer staples, Woolies, Coles, those boring companies, shouldn't do well, and they're not. So that's the same deal with utilities. Gold stocks are rising just on the back of the precious metal. So some of the movements are quite rational, consumer discretionary, consumer staples. Some are not so rational. Think banks. I said think Bex, which I think is like one of those old English tablets you took for Bex and a lie down.
Bex and a lie down.
Yeah. We're all over the place this morning.
You are showing your age, Sean.
The trick at the moment, though, is that the stock market is priced for perfection. And we have earnings season just around the corner. So if corporates disappoint, you are going to see some serious volatility on the share market. Morningstar reckons that the Aussie market is about 9% overvalued. It reckons that the Aussie market is relatively expensive compared to Wall Street. So plenty could go wrong. It's going to be a fun earnings season, which starts in about a fortnight.
Yeah, now that's the local market, Sean. What's happening in international markets?
The big news out of the US is that the Federal Reserve kept interest rates on hold at its January meeting yesterday morning. Chair Jerome Powell said he'd like to see further progress on inflation before considering an interest rate cut. He said rates may not move. Well, he said rates are on hold for the foreseeable future. There's worries in the US about the reemergence of inflation. Put on top of that, Donald Trump's tariff theories, or the prospect of tariffs under Donald Trump, and inflation is becoming a bit more of a concern in the world because the economy, once again, Donald Trump wasn't impressed with the fact that the Fed didn't cut interest rates. He posted, I quote, "If the Fed had spent less time on gender ideology, green energy, and fake climate change, inflation would never have been a problem," end quote. There's also a bunch of tech companies reporting over the past 36 hours on Wall Street. Worth running through some of the big ones. Tesla said it was on track to roll out new, cheaper EVs in the first half of this year, but its quarterly profit actually fell short of expectations. They'd had to do a lot of discounting Tesla to move units. Meta's Mark Zuckerberg was very upbeat about the group's artificial intelligence strategy, but he unveiled a disappointing sales forecast. And Microsoft said its cloud computing business will continue to grow slowly in the current quarter as the company struggles to build enough data centers to handle demand for its AI products.
Sean, you've got an interview coming up after the show, and this is an interesting one, particularly as it relates to investors. You're speaking with Estelle Parker, who is the co-CEO of the Responsible Investment Association Australasia. Quite a mouthful.
It is very topical, given some of the pronouncements from Donald Trump. So it's about investors thinking about being responsible when they're investing. Now, that might be around things like ESG, it might be around climate change, it might be around diversity, inclusion, gender issues, those sorts of things. Obviously, these have come to the fore because Donald Trump is winding some of the back some of the legislation in the US around it. So I asked Estelle about that, and it just seems that certainly there hasn't been much of a change here in Australia. In fact, that whole responsible investing segment is growing and the returns are great. So it's a good chat.
Yeah, and some interesting comments as well about the role that institutional investors are playing in driving that growth as well.
Yeah.
So the scale of it is certainly increasing. That's coming up after the show, Sean. So stick around for that one. We've got plenty more still to come. We are talking politics and crypto and power prices. Plenty to get through. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has classified the incident this week whereby explosives and a list of Jewish sites were found in a caravan in northwestern Sydney as terrorism.
The Prime Minister held a National Security Committee meeting yesterday morning. He wouldn't comment on the operation involving the caravan. Now, police haven't designated it as terrorism, but the Prime Minister and New South Wales Premier Chris Minns have called it that. A man is in custody involving the find. In fact, he was in custody before police went to that particular location. Notwithstanding the discovery, ASIO said the national terrorism threat will remain at probable for the immediate future. The Prime Minister condemned the recent spate of anti-Semitic hate crime that's going on. He said perpetrators should be hunted down and locked up. 100% agree with him on that one. Opposition leader Peter Dutton accused Anthony Albanese of ignoring a rise in anti-Semitism, saying that the situation has escalated.
Sean, the federal opposition has promised to be a friend of cryptocurrencies and will prioritise legislation to protect buyers of Bitcoin and other digital assets.
Luke Howarth, the Coalition's financial services spokesman, told an event on Wednesday evening that supporting the crypto industry and the use of blockchain technology was a, quote, long-standing priority for the Coalition, and it will continue to be a priority under the Dutton government. end quote. Now, that's according to the Fin Review. Maybe they're learning from the Trump administration, because under Trump, the regulator in the US, the Securities and Exchange Commission, has flipped from pursuing crypto exchanges for breaches of the law to developing a regulatory framework. That's effectively what Mr. Howarth is talking about here, developing a regulatory framework if the Dutton government, or if the coalition wins government. For its part, the Albanese government has promised to introduce laws to establish clearer rules for crypto assets.
Just staying in politics quickly, Sean, the federal government is promising to give Victoria $2.5 billion in additional education funding over the next 10 years.
On announcing it yesterday, Education Minister Jason Clare called it a big day for public schools in the state. He said it will turn around the decline in teenagers not finishing school in Victoria. Meanwhile, Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones will retire from Parliament at the next federal election, setting the stage for a reshuffle of Mr. Albanese's economics team. That, of course, is if the ALP wins the next poll. Stephen Jones, been in Canberra for 15 years, elected in 2010. Good luck to him.
15 years is a long time.
It is a long time, isn't it? Yeah.
Goodness me. When you think about kind of how many elections have been during that time, and just the amount of politicking and all of the infighting and all of this, all separate to kind of actual kind of policy and passing of policies and legislative agendas and things like that, all the behind the scenes stuff, it would wear you down, right?
It would. Although sometimes I wonder, 15 years is like the middle range. I can understand someone going for a term or two and thinking, this isn't for me.
Yes.
And I understand someone going for 40 years.
Yep.
But the 15 years is the middle range, I reckon.
That's quite curious then.
I generally think politicians, and Stephen Jones I'm sure can be included in this, not that I know him at all, I think they work really hard. They get a bad rap, obviously, but a lot of time away from family, a lot of time around policy debates, that type of thing. And I admire people who are willing to do that generally.
Yeah.
So good on him.
Yeah, and a lot of time being answerable to a whole lot of people. That in the end you have to be open to conversations with every single person that you pass in the street, that kind of thing. And it really is, it's not just a job.
Yeah.
Anyway, Sean, we've turned this into a politician appreciation society. We will get back to business now with mineral resources. Debt there has grown to $5 billion as it builds its export hub in Western Australia and battles weak commodity prices and governance concerns.
So it's building $2.6 billion to create an export hub in WA, in the Pilbara. It will export iron ore and lithium from there. This is the company who has had all sorts of corporate governance issues. It's emerged over the last few days that founder and managing director Chris Ellison, who has about 11% of the company, has been issued a Section 19 notice by the corporate regulator, ASIC. That means he's under formal investigation. That's over alleged offshore tax evasion schemes that he benefited from. That came to light last year. As a result of that, Mr. Ellison has said he will step down within 18 months. Before that story broke, MinRes's share price was more than $4. Today, it's kind of just over $2.30. So it really has had a fall from grace. Now, the drop in lithium prices hasn't helped. So it's not just about the governance issues. It's now finding itself in a position where it's got really high debt level of $5 billion. That's notwithstanding, it actually got $1.1 billion for selling a stake in its 147-kilometre private railroad in the Pilbara. But a lot going on for that company, from governance to weak prices to management change.
Yeah, there certainly is. Now, the cost of generating electricity across Australia's grid over the final 3 months of last year rose more than 80%. Isn't that staggering? It was amid very high demand and an all-time low availability of coal power.
The Australian Energy Market Operator releases the figures. It doesn't mean that we will immediately see higher bills, but it will certainly put upward pressure on household and business bills. Across the market, the average cost was $88 per megawatt hour. Now, to most of us, that probably doesn't mean anything. What's interesting is how much more expensive it is in some states when things go wrong. So at the end of last year, New South Wales, compared to that $88, New South Wales was $143 per megawatt hour. That's because the state's two largest coal generators experienced prolonged issues, including outages. Queensland was 127. Victoria was down to 45, which is actually a lot for that state, but clearly way below New South Wales and Queensland. Regulators set what's known as a default market offer. They take into account higher wholesale prices that we saw, so that there'll be a lot of pressure for the regulator to push that through to higher retail prices. Doesn't mean they necessarily will. The other part of this story, which I find really interesting, so New South Wales, Bayswater, and help me out, the other coal power...
In New South Wales?
Araring. So they had outages last year. And it's amazing when you take coal out of the system, just how expensive energy becomes. And of course, we're talking about taking these coal powers offline in the next few years. So it's a real life example of the treacherous path of keeping energy prices down that we face when we take coal out of the system.
Yeah, the pressure is certainly on. Now, speaking of pressure, Sean, you mentioned earlier that earnings season is only, a fortnight away? And ahead of earnings season, there is plenty of company announcements. May I put you under a certain amount of time pressure here and give you 40 seconds to give us some highlights of the company announcements that we've seen in the last 24 hours. I'm going to start your timer. In fact, I started it 3 seconds ago.
Okay, we better talk about Zipco, the buy now, pay later group. Its share price fell 25% yesterday after its second quarter results disappointed. Perpetual, the fund manager, it reported a rise in total assets under management to $230 billion, but that was mostly because of positive currency movements. There was actually a net outflow of $3.8 billion, not so good there. The other one, to get into this 40 seconds, the debt collector group Credit Corp announced a disappointing collections figure. Its share price fell 12% yesterday.
You've got a 9-second kind of surplus there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for an Ipanema.
I was going to invite you to share some more information, and instead you decided to sing for us.
Elevator music.
Oh, that was glorious. All right, turning to international news now, Sean. President Donald Trump says he is ordering the construction of a massive detention camp with 30,000 beds. That is huge. At the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba. It'll be the largest US facility of its kind.
He made the announcement ahead of signing a bill to expand the number of immigrant detainees held in US custody just for minor property crimes. Mr. Trump said the camp would detain the worst criminal, illegal aliens threatening the American people, according to the Washington Post. He said, "We even don't trust other countries to hold them, and we don't want them coming back, so we're going to send them out to Guantanamo. This will double our capacity immediately." Well, the largest facility in the US network currently has around 2,000 beds. So we're going to 30,000 in one facility. So it's a hard word to say, Michael. Guantanamo military site will certainly dwarf any other location.
Now, tragic news, Sean, to finish on. A passenger jet with 64 people aboard collided with an army helicopter while landing at the main airport near Washington, D.C., triggering a very large search and rescue operation in the nearby Potomac River.
American Airlines confirmed that 60 passengers and 4 crew members were on the flight. 3 soldiers were aboard the helicopter, a US official said. Multiple bodies have been pulled from the water. The mid-air crash occurred around 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the US, yesterday afternoon Australian time. A regional jet that had departed from Wichita, Kansas, collided with a military Black Hawk helicopter while it was on approach to an airport runway. What's quite incredible, this occurred kind of 3 miles south of the White House and the Capitol. That would have to be some of the most tightly controlled and monitored airspace in the world, Michael.
It's extraordinary and a really, really tragic story. Sean, up next is the Fear and Greed daily interview with Estelle Parker, co-CEO of the Responsible Investment Association Australasia. It is in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform, or you can find it at fearandgreed.com.au. And at midday today as well, there is a new episode of Ask Fear and Greed where we answer listener questions. Always a good listen. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thanks, Michael.
It is Friday, the 31st of January, 2025. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.